I'm Mick Danzig.
And I'm Hannah Hampton, and you're listening to HR After Hours.
Well, hello and welcome to HR After Hours podcast, the only HR podcast banned from Comic-Con for enthusiastically heckling the Disney Star Wars characters. Hannah Hampton, my sister from another mister. How are you doing today?
I am great. And as somebody who attends these comic book conventions, those hecklers gots to go.
You would think that that would be the one place you would be safe.
Rather than the entertainers that show up and the celebrities, I feel like that heckling happens to the poor cosplay folks mostly. And I think that's awful because to me, it takes a lot of guts. You know, first of all, it takes a lot of talent to build these costumes. And second of all, it takes a lot of guts to go out in public and be vulnerable. So I celebrate the cosplay folks. So bravo to you, and boo to any hecklers who heckle them.
One of the things that I've said we'll really focus on is celebrating when companies make good decisions. Our
Mhm.
focus is primarily always going to be in people, but it wouldn't be fair for me not to point this out. I don't know if you ever order like beverages from Amazon. Like I get a lot of
No.
like low ingredient energy drinks. And I've noticed in the last 3 weeks that when I get these energy drink 12 packs or cases, usually I have some Atkins bars in with them. And my Atkins bars, they've been throwing them in the same box and they're just smashed to shit. Haven't had time to be like a Karen on Amazon. And then I just read this article yesterday. Amazon's air-filled pillows
Oh,
will
yeah.
soon be a thing of the past.
Mhm.
So Amazon saying they've eliminated 90% of the single-use packaging in North America and will soon eliminate it altogether, focusing ultimately on recycled paper. I think that's awesome. I think we need to have as little plastic as possible. But then let me say, can we put the paper in instead of just eliminating the air-filled packets so I can eat an Atkins bar sometime soon? That would be great. I'm not a fan of Amazon, so anytime they do something that I can blast, I do. So I figured it wouldn't be fair for me not to at least acknowledge this because, yes, I do think that that's a great move because they have been a huge part of the problem when it comes to plastics and unrecycled goods. Seems like there's also maybe a change in team member confidence. So, Hannah, tell me about the article that you came across earlier.
Found this article and I thought it was really interesting considering in the past, 4 years what we've been dealing with. It says HR leaders say recruiting and retaining workers seems easier in 2024. So this is an article by Carolyn Christ and that we found on HR Drive. So they're comparing to how people are feeling from 2022 to 2024. HR leaders are feeling more confident in recruiting, saying recruitment's easier, and saying retaining workers has been easier. So I'll give you some of the data that Carolyn posted in here. It says in 2022, during the peak of the Great Resignation, 83% of HR leaders reported issues with recruitment. And I feel like I was one who dealt with it, which has dropped to 55% in 2024. Similarly, 66% of HR leaders reported difficulty with retaining workers in 2022, which has fallen to 41%. So I feel like those are decent drops. And I say decent because that's a good thing. Not struggling with recruitment, not struggling with keeping those great employees that you've recruited. Some of the information articles talking about the steps that companies have taken. So really looking at compensation, looking at benefits is starting to pay off. However, it says that more than half still report difficulty in finding talent. So I still feel like it will continue to be a struggle out there to recruit. And I feel like recruiting's never been easy. That's why there's an entire department dedicated to it. But at least it seems like things are easing up. What is your initial reaction to that, Mick?
I think there's a lot of moving pieces here. You and I both in our personal and professional lives spend a lot of time and energy trying to shift our focus to the positive, right? Not worrying about things that don't require it, only worrying about things that have attached action items on your end when possible, things like that. These numbers are always the median, right? So I'm sure there are
Mhm.
some of those that were the high end stressing concerns 2 years ago. Even if they're on the high end of these numbers, that's got to be 100 pounds
Well,
off their shoulders, right?
yeah. So I will say, just to like, you were totally correct. So I want to read a little additional information because I think this makes a lot of sense, and we'll likely agree on it. But it says that in a survey, so it was a March and April of 2024 survey of 216 HR executives, a lot of the retention challenges appeared to be linked with the work arrangement. So 15% of leaders at organizations that allow employees to choose where they work have retention issues. But 45% of those organizations with the mandatory on site work said the same. So it seems it's heavily leaning towards companies that require on site work. So that hybrid work has improved companies' ability to recruit and retain their talent. I would say, I bet chances are folks, the folks who are still having the problems are the ones who are saying or have the requirement, let's get real, in hospitals, in retail and restaurants. You can't work remotely, at least in a number of those positions, the ones that require you to be on site. You wonder, it's truly the flexibility piece or other thing?
I would imagine the flexibility is a huge factor. And I think another part of it too is there's trial and error in every change. So I'm sure there's some people that thought they were doing a hybrid work model that they were just
Mhm.
creating a disaster, or they weren't executing it or communicating it properly, or they kept waffling back and forth on what the rules were and how often you had to be in. Thing is, when you make changes, if it's gonna be some trial and error, you have to announce that on the front end, right?
Mhm.
You have to say, "We may be giving more freedom than it's gonna work out. We hope not," or, "We're gonna try this much freedom, and if this works, maybe we'll add a little more. We're gonna ease into it." Whatever it is, there's always gonna be things where you're gonna go, "Oh, this works great. Oh, wow, didn't foresee that issue with that." Sometimes it's just being flexible and figuring it out, which is, I think, the number one solution when it
Sure.
comes to hybrid work models, or just figuring out, what's the win-win. So
Yeah.
ultimately, we're always gonna champion the employee, and we want to, because the driving force, that's what we're here to do, is talk about
Right.
retaining talent and things like that. But ultimately, all businesses came to an approach where they determined the win-win. This is good for you working for me, Hannah. This is good for me, the employer. I'm getting what I need. If you can find that balance, I would call that business zen when it comes to
Yeah.
people practices.
For
So
sure.
so some of this shift could be trial and error. I'm not as a huge part of it, but I bet that's part of it, where companies had to get it right. And part of it is, I think, companies figuring out and giving in that weren't willing to have a little wiggle room. But I think more so than ever, people are looking for in their career moves are either a collaborative environment where they feel like they're completely heard and they can have a say in the way their job is structured or executed, or at the very least, knowing that their employer is willing to listen and consider something that's a reasonable request.
I don't want to say, to answer that question that you just posed, or the theory, there was a WTW survey in the first quarter of 2024 that 72% of employees said they plan to stick with their current employer. And comparing it to 2022, which this is, this whole article is comparing from 2022, and it said when half of employees were looking to leave. That is a great improvement. Now, the employees' top reasons for staying at their job was pay, which I feel like is the obvious. People should get paid fairly for their work. Job security, which, if you're someone like me who works in the tech space and all of the tech layoffs and recruiting and HR training, all of that over the past couple of years, job security is huge. Health benefits, Again, I feel like obvious. And then flexible work arrangements, which is what we're talking about here, allowing for hybrid. If you can successfully complete your job from home, but your company is requiring you to be in the office 5 days a week, why? Give people that flexibility so they can have that beautiful balance, that zen that you were alluding to. So those are the top reasons for staying. Pay, job security, health benefits, and flexible work arrangements, which I feel like we've been preaching for the entire duration of our podcast. People want what people want.
It's so funny. I can't believe we're still having this conversation because I
Mm-hmm.
remember having this conversation with people in the year 2000 where you had to explain to them, listen, I don't have a leadership warehouse or barn out in the country where I'm going to go handpick those people that have just been sitting around waiting for you to offer them a job. Now it's the workforce has changed dramatically, and a lot of it's driven by what the team member, associate, employee, whatever you want to call them, what they really want. The lack of compromise as far as values that have joined the
Mm-hmm.
workplace, which should have existed a long time ago, but that's just not how certain generations were raised. You were happy to have a job. You were, wait for it, grateful to have a job. I do believe in gratitude in all that you have to be a part of your happiness and your abundance,
Mm-hmm.
but you shouldn't feel my boss is going to get everything they want out of me because I'm just happy to have a job. Those people are fewer and far between. There are
And
still
I
workers out
really,
there.
and I'm really hopeful that kind of generation starts to either retire or just move on, because I saw something really interesting on Facebook that I feel like is aligned to that, where it's like people will say, well, when I was rising through the ranks, this is how it was. So why is it a problem? What I read online was somebody had posted, if you suffered in life and want other people to suffer as you did because, quote, you turned out fine, unquote, you did not, in fact, turn out fine. I think that's true. Just because you grew up in the generation where managers yelled at you, managers were like mentally abusive, does not mean it's okay for you to be the same way and to think that people need to give up their lives for their companies. People do not need to live for their jobs, live to work. I feel like we're in this day and age where people realize that life is short and there's a lot more to life than just your job.
I love that. And yeah, and that's another thing we've been saying forever. Companies have to realize that the biggest general change in the workforce philosophy is that people no longer live to work, they work to live. Earlier in my career, thought that everyone should have to put in their hard knocks like I did because I just thought that's how it was. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that I was like, well, I had to do it, so they had to do it. I'm like, well, yeah, that's just what we do. I was never like, you got to go through the hell I did out of spite, but I was just like, it is what it is, which I hate that saying, by the way, or just that particular wording, but it doesn't have to be. And there's a couple different ways to kind of deprogram yourself. It doesn't matter what my journey was. That was my journey. And a lot of
Right.
the decisions that I made at various stages in my life determined that. That's on me, and I should always look at my human experience as my individual experience and not project it onto others. That's, I know, very kumbaya for me, especially, but that's exactly how I had to start looking at this piece because I know what's going to happen, Hannah. As soon as I retire, the 4-day work week's going to be standard. People are going to get 5 weeks of vacation minimum, but they should. All I can do is go, well, I want my children to have those things so I
Mm-hmm.
can be happy for them. And let's be honest, it's not like my life sucks and it didn't suck to
Right.
get to this point. But yes, I worked on average a minimum of 50 hours a week throughout my career, sometimes considerably more. Do I regret it? Sure, I should have spent more time at home with the family, but am I salty, and do I think everyone else should have to do that to get to where
Suffer
they need?
through. Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely not. I would rather champion for people not to do that moving forward. But that took a lot of effort on my end to get to that point and not be
Mhm.
that person that said, "Well, why do they get it so easy?" Well, I didn't realize till doing this podcast what has gone on in the last 15 years, and with the housing market and everything else for those coming out of college and the insane cost of college, it's a lot for these kids. So I hope by the time that they have chosen their career path, that they work 3 or 4 days a week and have a true work-life balance, because there's so many outside factors out there that maybe that's why
Mhm.
people are also willing to stay with the job they have if it's pretty good, is because now is the time where we're not as stressed about work. We're more worried about everything that's going
Right.
on with the multiple wars, the politics, which you and I try so hard to avoid in our conversations. But, during the pandemic, work was stressed because you had to figure out how you were to live, what's the new work model, when do I get to go back to work, whatever it was. That I think that stress spread for 2 years, and then I think some of the priorities have shifted in. I gotta worry about my family, about what's going on elsewhere, that as long as my boss is willing to work with me, I'm good for now.
For sure. For sure. I always tell people, jobs are there's going to be good and bad. So there's always going to be hard parts of work or parts that you don't enjoy. But as long as the good outweighs the bad, I feel like that's pretty darn good. And again, I think everybody's got their own needs that they have in their job. And it could be flexibility. I appreciate flexibility. That's something that I've even in the past number of months have really come to realize that is truly important to me is having flexibility so that I can do some of the things that fulfill me outside of work. So really understanding, well, what's important to you? Is it a big paycheck, but you're willing to forego flexibility or willing to forego some of your personal life? Or is it flexibility, time with family, stability? Maybe it's that having that 9 to 5 schedule, or maybe you want something that's more flexible. Maybe you have some days off during the week, but you're okay with working on the weekends. It's just completely up to what's important to you. And that's one of the beautiful things in my life is I've worked in lots of different industries. I'm currently in tech, but I've worked in restaurant and retail. I've, worked in the consulting world. So I've talked to different people who have different needs. And, while I feel like retail, restaurant, that's hard. I don't want to work on a Saturday night personally, but some people that is totally their jam and they love having their days off in the middle of the week. So like I run errands and it's quieter out there. So again, what's important to you is what you should try to strive for, which I know is easier said than done. But again, that's that flexibility that people crave, that people want, and that they should be afforded if it makes sense.
I don't think you could be more accurate and on point. Part of finding the job that you're gonna stick with that makes you happy is, like you said, on the front end, determining what is important to me. You mentioned some things are easier said than done. You and I have made a lot of changes in our lives because we have tried to focus more on what makes us happy, both personally and professionally. And you've got some new endeavors you've done to do that. I've been doing some things, and I think that one of the biggest shifts, if you're able to make this shift earlier than I did, I think I'm very late on this.
Better late than never. You're never too late for things. Sorry, go on.
Absolutely. One of the things that a lot of other parts of the world make fun of the Western way of life and how we do things is that we have this huge focus on the future. We do everything for future rewards. Now, there are
Mhm.
some industries that, yes, you have to front end your work. If you're going to be a doctor, if you're going to be a dentist, things like that, a lawyer, there are careers that do require very intensive front end work. If that's like you said, though, but if that's what you want, if that's your calling, you know that and you selected that.
Mhm.
But if we start living our lives and determining our happiness by being able to focus on now, what makes us happy now? How can I use my work schedule to get the most out of my life today? That will create true happiness or help you decide that you need to make a career move. because
So
it
oh,
doesn't
sorry.
go with what's going to make you happy today.
So I have to say, sorry to interrupt. I got excited because you brought up something that's it's part of yoga, and it's called santosha, and it's about contentment, and it's just being happy with where you are today. And I'm a bit of a future, like I'll be happy when, and I have been working. That's something I've been working on for the past over year, or probably about a year, really focusing on contentment today, which is so good for your happiness, your internal joy. But I learned something new, or somebody said something that was really insightful to me, and it was basically people who focus too heavily on the future or worry too heavily on the future tend to have anxiety, or it causes anxiety. And when you worry or think too much about the past, that's what causes or can cause some depression. And I'm like, that totally makes sense, because you think about how you wax nostalgic and things were better back in the day and things were better then, and that can cause you to be depressed, feeling like today's not as good. Or if you think I'll be happy when, but future, 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 it's stressful to think, well, I have to get there, I won't be happy. So it's about really finding a good balance and being content with where you are today, the strides that you've made to get to where you are today. So I'm sorry, it got me really happy, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just been a big focus of mine for a while, is focusing on just that contentment.
So speaking of contentment,
Mm.
I could not be smiling more right now because you unknowingly just quoted me back to you when I was quoting Eckhart Tolle as part of my program that I started about 10 years ago of
Mhm.
living in the moment. I know we've talked about it very early on. It's to find true happiness, you live in the now. If you're
Mhm.
living in the past, you're depressed. If you're living in the future, you're anxious or your anxiety kicks in. But if
Yeah.
you just live in the moment, and the thing is, the reason you don't wanna focus on the anxiety portion of the future, it's that tendency for you to create scenarios that don't exist. How
Right.
many times in your life have you had an argument in the shower in the
Oh,
morning,
yes.
getting ready to go to work, preparing to
Uh-huh.
deal with your boss or a coworker, and you actually talk out loud and you get animated and you're like, "No, fuck you." And then you laugh
Yes.
because you just caught yourself because you have created a scenario that there's a 90% chance will not take place that day, but you
Mhm.
started out your day so worried and mad and but you think you're preparing on how you're gonna deal with this person and what they're gonna do and what you're walking into, and most of the time it doesn't happen, and you just put all that negative energy out there, and
Mhm.
you and I both believe what I put out in the universe is what's gonna come back to me, or at the very least, I only wanna put good things out there for everyone if you're not worried about what's coming back to you, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
just like you said, with work, you've gotta have some bad, otherwise you wouldn't notice the good, but it's gotta
Mhm.
be a balance, right? And that's how life is. If everything was easy, it doesn't take long to take that for granted,
Look
not
in the good place.
appreciate it. Yes. Yeah, that's it. I think some of these numbers, going back to that last article, are about
Mhm.
the balance of everything. Let's get back to what our core purpose is as a podcast is celebrating companies that do the right thing and encouraging companies that don't to make that change.
Right.
So yes, the workforce is settling a little bit, but they're settling down. They're not ready to settle for less.
Mhm.
Again, if we can work on that win-win, this makes good sense for you as the employer, and this is a good deal for them as the associate. If you make your decisions, whether it's about comp, benefits, hybrid work models, if you just work about making it a win-win for both, I think that's the true win, and I think these numbers will get even better.
Absolutely.
Well, Hannah, I think we have kumbaya'd the hell out of this one, but I like it. It's great. You and I haven't had a new episode in a few weeks, and I'm happy to
It's
have
been
it
a
back.
bit.
Always a pleasure. And thanks for being a key component in doing what?
Putting the human back into human resources.
Peace and love. Talk to you later. Have a great day.
Bye.